All right, let's talk about how world power actually works. We're going to decode the real rules of the game. But to start, forget about presidents and generals for a second. Our first move on this global chessboard comes from a Wall Street firm, and it shows how money can be every bit as powerful as an army.
So yeah, what does some high-stakes bet on Wall Street have to do with grand strategy and military moves? That is the big question we're tackling today. And trust me, the answer pulls back the curtain on how power, money, and control are all tangled up on the world stage. It's a fascinating puzzle. So, let's jump into our first piece of that puzzle, the game of leverage. Now, leverage is just a fancy word for using something small, like a piece of inside knowledge or a really clever bet, to control a much, much bigger outcome. And this first example, it isn't about military might at all. It's about a slick financial play. Okay, so let me walk you through this so-called tariff bet. It's kind of genius in a devious way. Step 1. The U.S. government slaps new taxes or tariffs on stuff coming into the country. Simple enough. But then, step 2, the Supreme Court says, nope, those are illegal. Now the government owes billions of dollars in refunds to big companies. And here is the brilliant part. Step 3, a financial firm swoops in and buys the rights to those future refunds for just pennies on the dollar. So step 4, when the government finally pays up, that firm could make a massive 3 to 5 times their money back. That right there is financial leverage.
But wait, it gets even crazier. The company that allegedly made this bet, it used to be run by the very same person who, as the Secretary of Commerce, was advising on the tariff policy in the first place. Now, he officially handed control over to his family, but, it raises a massive red flag. A huge question about a conflict of interest. Are the people making the rules of the game also secretly betting on the outcome?
This quote really nails it. You've got sovereign power, that's the government, trying to control trade, smashing up against financial power, which honestly doesn't really care who wins or loses. It just wants to make a buck from all the chaos and confusion. This ability to weaponize uncertainty for profit, that's the essence of leverage.
Okay, so we've seen financial leverage. Now let's switch gears and see how that idea applies to geopolitics, to the map itself. We're going to zoom in on the Americas, and specifically what's been going on in Venezuela, to see a much older and much bigger rule of the game in action.
So the story you usually hear about Venezuela is that it's all about the oil. And sure, that's the tip of the iceberg. They have the biggest reserves on the planet. But the strategic reality, the part of the iceberg underwater, is way more interesting. The real game wasn't just about getting oil. It was about denying leverage to rivals like China and Russia. The real prize wasn't black gold. It was controlling the supply of rare earth elements. The stuff you need to build everything from an iPhone to a fighter jet.
And this whole strategy is guided by a 200-year-old idea called the Monroe Doctrine. The easiest way to think about it is like America's house rules for its neighborhood. Way back in 1823, the U.S. basically drew a line around the Western Hemisphere and said to the rest of the world, this is our turf, no new colonies, no military bases, no funny business. And please, don't think this is just some dusty old history lesson. As this quote from Marco Rubio makes crystal clear, that doctrine is alive and kicking today. So when countries like China and Russia started getting a little too cozy with Venezuela, investing money, sharing intel, and getting access to those critical rare earths, it set off that 200-year-old alarm bell in Washington. The U.S. saw it as an adversary setting up shop right in its own backyard.
Okay, so now let's zoom out, all the way out. From the Americas to the giant landmass of Europe and Asia, what some strategists call the world island. For more than a century, 2 epic theories have been battling it out to explain how to dominate this global chessboard. If you get these 2 ideas, you'll understand pretty much every major conflict happening today.
First up is the Heartland Theory. This is a land power strategy. The idea is actually pretty simple. In the center of that massive Eurasian continent is a resource-rich fortress. It's called the Heartland. The theory goes that if you can control this vast protected area, you have the resources and the strategic safety to eventually take over the whole world.
But then, another thinker came along and said, hold on a second. And he came up with the Rimland Theory. This is a sea power strategy. It argues that real global power isn't in the center of the map, but on its edges. If you control the coastal areas, the ports, and the shipping lanes, the Rimland, you can basically build a wall around the Heartland, cutting off its access to world trade and choking its power.
So are these just old, dusty theories from 100 years ago? Absolutely not. They give us an incredibly powerful lens to understand the real motivations behind 2 of the planet's biggest flashpoints right now, the war in Ukraine and the simmering tensions over Taiwan.
This table here breaks it down perfectly. First, let's look at Russia. As a classic land-based heartland power, its strategic goal in Ukraine is all about the Rimland. It's fighting for access to a warm water port on the Black Sea, so its navy isn't frozen in for half the year. Now shift your eyes down to China. Its focus on Taiwan looks different, but it's just as strategic. This isn't a classic land grab. It's a 21st century power play for tech dominance to control the most advanced semiconductor supply chain on Earth.
So, let's put all these pieces back together. We've got financial leverage, we've got the Monroe Doctrine, and we've got this epic struggle between the Heartland and the Rimland. If you mix all that together, a theory starts to emerge about where the U.S. might focus its attention next. And according to that theory, all eyes are on Iran.
So why Iran? Well, just look. It sits at the perfect intersection of everything we've been talking about. First, from a Rimland perspective, it controls the Strait of Hormuz, a tiny waterway that about 20% of the world's oil has to pass through. It's a major choke point. Second, it's a key supplier of cheap oil and weapons to America's biggest rivals, China and Russia. And third, it poses a direct, ongoing threat to Israel, one of America's most important allies in the region. Iran literally checks every single strategic box.
So there you have it. We've looked at the different types of leverage, from Wall Street bets to geographic choke points. We've unpacked the grand strategies that have shaped the world for a century. We've seen how these rules apply everywhere from Venezuela to Ukraine and Taiwan. The board is set, the pieces are moving. So the final question is for you. Now that you can see the board, which move do you think comes next?